All right, hello, my name is Carla Brown. I'm volunteer host coming to you from Winnipeg, Canada, located within Treaty Number 1 territory, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dene, and Dakota, and the birthplace of the Métis Nation. Thank you for joining us today for the latest Kumi Now online gathering. Today, as we look at Palestine's natural resources and how they are exploited by Israel and Israeli settlers. Before we start, I'd like to remind you all that this session is being broadcast live on Facebook. If you do not wish to appear, please turn off your video feed. We would also love it if you could quickly share one of the links that are being posted in the chat right now so that others may also join. We are inviting all of you to tell us how you are applying Kumi Now in your community or are otherwise advocating for Palestine. If you have an idea or a project that you'd like to share for up to 5 minutes, in a future meeting, please email kuminow@kuminow.com, and the address is in the chat if you need that again. Now it's time for the weekly activism survey. Mark, could you launch the poll? Please note that with this poll, there are 3 questions, so please ensure that you scroll down to the 3rd question. So I hope you've all had time to answer the questions. So the answer to number 2 is staff at the Palestine Museum of Natural History have officially counted more than 388 species in the botanical garden. They hope to have more than 550 species by the end of this year, so they're still working on that. And the answer to number 3 is quarries. According to Who Profits, quote, today, the 11 Israeli administered quarries in Area C provide 12 million tons of construction material annually. According to Yesh Din, approximately 75% of the products yielded by Israeli and internationally owned quarries in the West Bank are transferred for use in the Israeli construction market. In some of the quarries, the percentage reaches 94%. The rest, 7 to 8 million tons annually, is used for the illegal Israeli settlement construction industry in occupied West Bank. Only a small fraction of these resources are used to serve Palestinian construction market. We hope that you will find this session on the natural resources of Palestine interesting and informative. Next, we will have today's presenters introduce themselves briefly, starting with Omar, then Denise, then Dr. Mazen.
Thank you, Carla. My name is Omar Harami. I will be giving you an update from the ground from Jerusalem, Palestine.
Denise Asad, a storyteller from Palestine, living in Haifa with my family. Happy to be with you always.
And I am Mazen Kumsiya from speaking to you from Beit Sahur, the shepherd's field, right next to Bethlehem. You're muted, Carla. Carla, you're muted. Carla, you are muted.
Thank you. Sorry, I muted myself and I was stuck in the off position and couldn't get back on. Thank you. Thank you everyone for introducing yourselves. Omar, could you please update us on what's going on in Palestine?
Yes, with pleasure. I will try to be brief because everybody's attention is focused in different areas. When it comes to regarding the coronavirus, Israel has been, and they're making it very obvious in the news that they have worldwide that they have been really successful with gaining access to to vaccines, and they are very soon approaching to herd immunity. They're doing a good job when it comes to Israeli citizens, but when it comes to the Palestinian people living under occupation in the West Bank, Gaza, which Israel has full control over the borders and over their daily lives, a vaccination campaign has started, but it's very slow because of the very limited resources and number of vaccines that are available. In Palestine, the number of cases are on the rise, with today over 31 Palestinians have passed away due to the COVID-19. It's also all over the news. Israel is going, in Israel, they're having elections. Basically, the main reason is that in Israel, they've had a problem in the past 2 years to form a government, because although the majority of the Knesset or members of the Israeli parliament are right-wing or extreme right-wing, with very few seats to the left, they are having a big debate whether Netanyahu should continue as the prime minister or not. Should he be the person who forms the government or not? So that's basically the debate. It's not Palestine or the occupation or other agendas. It is mainly Netanyahu. Unfortunately, statistics show or polls show that he might be winning this election. It's not that we'd be happy if he wins or lose, but it's going to be, I mean, we expect more deterioration in the Palestinian situation, which is already, we have reached to the lowest ever in Palestine, but we hope that it would be a less, or Israel will not be able to form a government that is mainly right-wing. In Palestine, in Jerusalem, there has been a campaign. Many Palestinians have been arrested because they, with the accusation that they were carrying the Palestinian flag in Jerusalem. So a campaign started among different people is to try to either wear the Palestinian flag or put it on, or to try to wear it in a different way, as a way of resistance, nonviolent resistance. So it's a growing movement. Some people from the international community are taking photos with the Palestinian flag in a way just to say, you know, it is, we refuse to be silenced, or I mean, it is, we recognize that Palestine exists. So it's something interesting. If you have a Palestinian flag, just post it on Facebook or on wherever you can. It's pretty encouraging. It started in Jerusalem, and hope it will others will copy this nice initiative. 3 days ago, over 550 organizations they wrote a petition, a joint letter, calling on the UN Human Rights Council to end Israel's impunity. Israel continues to violate human rights, not unique in this. Many countries, unfortunately, around the world do violate human rights, but when it comes to Israel, somehow Israel acts with impunity, definitely with the protection of the United States government and other governments, unfortunately, from where they identify or they try to identify from themselves from democracies or developed societies, they are endorsing or giving Israel impunity. So this is a very encouraging letter, and hopefully that this will continue to embarrass the United Nations and especially the UN Human Rights Council to act, to take more serious steps on ending or holding Israel accountable. Thank you and I hope it was informative.
Thank you, Omar. We now turn things over to Denise Assad, our storyteller, who will be telling a story that relates to today's issues.
It's a story about the Sultan and the tailor, and his tailor. And why I choose this story, my mother, Allah يطول بعمرها, she's still, she's not a tailor anymore, but she used to be a tailor. And what I want really to say that our culture, or my generation, I am now 63, we grow up in very saving culture and recycling things. My mother never threw shirts of my father. She used to sew them and prepare them for my brother. Later on, she used them to clean the windows. Or till now, I have one of the bags from the lentils or the rice from clothes from my father shared, and my father passed away 21 years ago. So she was cleaning the plastic bags and put them to dry and use them again. We were more, we took care about our resources. But now we became a very competition culture society. We are throwing things, not taking care about our resources. Okay, I really know that the occupation are doing very bad with our resources, but we have also to take the responsibility and to try to go back to this culture of our fathers or grandfathers, and not become such a society or spending everything and not taking care. So this story, I heard it, it's a Russian folk tale. I heard it from a very unique soul sister, Catrice Horsley. She is a storyteller from Birmingham, now living in Sweden. Once upon a time, there was a sultan. Sultan is like a king. He had a tailor. And this tailor used to serve his father. And when he became a sultan, he also was his tailor. And he was really getting very old, and this was the time for him to retire. And the sultan felt very, very, he appreciates his work. He appreciates what he did for his father and for him. So he wants to give him a very special present for this occasion, and to let him spend his life now to rest and really to enjoy life and not work hard with him. So he went to his advisors. He asked them what I can bring to this tailor who served me all his life. He was so honest. He worked so hard for me and for my father. So the advice was to call all the weavers from all over the country and ask them to prepare a very, very special fabric or cloth for this tailor. And it had to be in the colors of the rainbow and soft as the ear of the newborn baby, really very soft. So the Sultan called all the weavers, and they worked hard for 7 days and nights. And in the promised day, the Sultan invited his tailor and all the people from all over the country, and he thanked him for what he gave for him, all the hard work and how he served him. And the weavers brought the clothes, the fabric, and when they opened it, all the people say it was marvelous. It was like the rainbow came from the sky, and it was in front of everybody. The Sultan called the tailor and thanked him and give him the fabric, this fabric. The tailor was still so excited, so thankful, and he took the cloth, thanked the Sultan, and went to his house. He thought and thought and thought what he will prepare from this fabric. It's so special, so soft. While he was eating, he thought about what to do. While he was sleeping, while he was sitting in front of the TV, whatever he did, he thought what to do with this fabric. In the end, he decided what he will do. He took a pencil and drew the pattern. He took the scissors and cut the fabric. He took the thread and the needle and sew the dress. And he worked so hard and put the buttons the whole night. And in the morning, it was a long jacket. He put it on and went out to the neighbor. And all the people, when they saw this coat, the jacket, they said, "Oh, how beautiful is the color!" And all the children came to touch the soft, very soft cloth. It was soft as the newborn ear. But after a year, because all the children of all the country were touching this jacket, it's worn out. But the tailor said, I can't throw it away. It's the Sultan present. And it's so precious for me, I can't. So he went home, he thought and thought and thought. Whenever he did, he thought and thought and thought. In the end, he took a pencil, he put a pattern, he took the scissors, cut the long jacket, he took the thread and the needle, and he saw a short jacket. He worked very hard the whole night, and he put in the end buttons. When he went out to the street, and the people saw this short jacket, all of them say, what a beautiful jacket, what a beautiful, marvelous colors. It's like the rainbow came from the sky to the earth on this jacket. And all the children all over the country, they came and touched this jacket. It was so smooth, so nice to touch. And it was like the newborn baby ear. And this jacket, after 1 year of touching, worn out. And the tailor said, oh, I can't throw it. It's the Sultan's present. So he went home, thought. The pencil, the scissors, the thread and the needle, and the buttons, worked hard all the night. And in the morning, he had a jacket, a vest without sleeves. And when he went out, as usual, all the people say, and all the children must touch it. It was so soft, so sweet, so marvelous, and it was soft as the newborn ear, baby ear. But after 1 year of touching, it's worn out. And the tailor did the same. He put the plan and worked so hard. In the morning, he had scrap. And when he went out, all the people were really, and all the children touched his scrap. And after 1 year, it worn out. He can't throw it. It's a Sultan present. So he worked hard and he prepared a button and he put it in his new jacket. But when he went out, nobody noticed this button. And the children didn't run after him and they want to touch it because it was soft, so soft. But after 1 year, he was so happy, jumping in the rain. The button fell down in the water and the mud. He searched for it for a long time. He didn't find it. And nothing remained from this great fabric that the weaver did for him with such a marvelous color, the rainbow, and so soft as the ear of the newborn baby. But what remains is the story that I am telling you now. And it's what remains from us, the stories. So حكايتي حكيتها بقول لكم خبيتها يا ريت تحبوها زي ما أنا حبيتها. I told you my story. I hope you will like it as I do. And bye-bye for everybody. Have a nice time.
Thank you, Denise, for that wonderful story.
Oh,
We now turn to our guest speaker, Dr. Mazen Kumseyeh. As he speaks, if you think of a question, please type it in the chat. I will try to answer or try to ask as many of your questions as possible when we get to the question and answer period at the end. Dr. Mazen, please go ahead.
Thank you, everybody. Good evening from Palestine. Of course, some of you are in different time zones. I hope you see my screen. I will be speaking about a bit focused more on natural resources on this session. and what's happening on the ground in terms of natural resources. Just a brief recap, which I talked at Kumi now about a year ago, showed a couple of these other introductory slides, but for the sake of the new people, I just want to emphasize that we live in this area, which is geographically and geologically fortunate because it has the lowest point on Earth, because it's a bottleneck of continents. Migrations of humans out of Africa happen through this country. Migrations of birds back and forth with Africa and Eurasia still happen through this country. The geology and the geography have actually made it possible for us to invent agriculture. By us, I mean the human species. So the first agricultural communities were established here in the Fertile Crescent. As you know, for example, Jericho is the oldest continuously inhabited town on Earth. And the reason for that is it has directly to do with the rich habitats, rich fauna and flora that exist here, the fertile land that's basically terra rosa soil, etc., which made our ancestors fairly wealthy compared to other countries nearby. And the Canaanitic people, as they were called or called themselves, who lived in this area, were always depicted in other cultures as people with rich resources in terms of animals, fauna and flora, etc. And you can see the hieroglyphics in Egyptian hieroglyphics or in Mesopotamian reliefs showing the Canaanites bringing always gifts to the king of those countries. Those people, the native people of Palestine, lived in relative harmony with nature for thousands of years, literally, until, of course, we have had the ethnic cleansing, the largest of its kind since World War II, or after World War II. The largest ethnic cleansing happened here, with most of the Palestinians rendered refugees removed from their land. 500 villages were destroyed, etc. And if you look at the population changes, as the Palestinians, this is from a website called Visualizing Palestine, which I highly recommend. It's a very nice, sorry about it, it's a bit fuzzy. I took it off the internet. But visualizing Palestine is a way to literally visualize what's going on. So in 1882, beginning of Zionist colonization of Palestine, 1880 to 82. And then slowly this bluish areas of Zionist colonization increased at the expense of the destruction of the native built up areas, habitable communities that you see in gray. That's culminated in 1948 with the creation of the State of Israel and 48% of Palestine, the land of Palestine. And land is the first natural resource, basically, that was targeted, as you saw in the maps. But then in 1967, Israel took the rest of Palestine, which is the West Bank and Gaza Strip, and proceeded to repeat the process of colonial settlement building. And on the map on the right, you see the colonial settlements that are in the West Bank today as we speak. This is what's called settler colonialism, which is directly related to natural resources of the country, as happened in, well, in the rest of the world. In fact, there is no country that didn't suffer from this malady of settler colonialism. Even Switzerland, if you want, as neutral as it is, it was, and the Swiss delegation was here the day before yesterday visiting the museum. And I told them, and they said, oh yeah, we had the Romans, and that's why South Switzerland speaks Italian, etc. So settler colonialism is a common phenomenon around the world. And its outcome is also very well studied and very well as a whole genre of books and articles on post-colonialism, etc. I don't want to make this a political document or political speech. But anyway, Palestine, on the left, you see basically levels of aridity. And, we have mountains, very big mountains, especially in north near Nablus and Jenin, and then the Jerusalem mountains and down to the Hebron mountains. Palestine is also rich in water resources. On the map on the right is the major tributaries of water. Of course, because we have that ridge of mountains in the middle, the tributaries run both on the western side of the hills and also on the eastern side of the hills. And on the western side of the hills, the rivers take the water to the Mediterranean Sea. On the eastern side of the hill, the rivers take the water to Jordan Valley, and that Jordan Valley basically from Lake Tiberias in the north and Lake Hula before it, but Lake Hula was destroyed by the Zionists, and takes it down from Lake Tiberias to the Jordan River to the Dead Sea, which is actually a lake, not a sea. But anyway, it's called the Dead Sea because there are a few living organisms there, mostly algae and so forth. It's very salty. It didn't used to be as salty as this is in historic times, but there is usage of water that depleted it. And if we talk about water, this is kind of interesting. Ramallah gets 619 millimeter of waters per year. London gets about the same, 596, actually less a bit than Ramallah. The difference, of course, is that in London, the water is used by the people. So water goes into the water aquifers and then it's extracted and used by the people of London. In the West Bank, the water is falls from the sky, it goes into the water aquifers. The water aquifers is controlled by Israel, and so as an occupying power, so the vast majority of the water ends up for Israelis, settler use, including swimming pools, etc., whereas the Palestinians get very little water. 91%, for example, of the water of the West Bank is used by the Israelis. This results in a significant water imbalance, and we end up as Palestinians, as native people, indigenous people of the country, getting less than the World Health Organization recommends for a healthy living per capita, whereas Jewish colonies built on stolen Palestinian land get many folds more. This is another image from visualizing Palestine, which shows this basically, how much water is used by Israeli settlers, 369 liters per day per settler, if you want, whereas for Palestinians, 73 liters per day. And the Gaza Strip also. These aquifers, if you want, in historic Palestine are shown on this map. There is the Eastern Water Aquifer, Western Water Aquifer, the coastal aquifers, the Galilee and Carmel. Of course, all of these were controlled by the native people before 1948. Now Israel has control essentially of all of them, regardless of the origination of the water there or international treaties regarding water, international obligations, for example, to provide the natives with their own water, to let them have their own water. We are not allowed to have our own water. How Israel does this is various mechanisms. For example, diversion of the water from Lake Tiberias, which occurred basically after 1948. And this big canal that they dug and developed to extract the waters of the headwaters of the Jordan Valley water system, to take it to the western parts of the country, the parts that have been already ethnically cleansed of the native people and brought in European Jewish colonizers. That is what they call the Israel water carrier, which takes up significant amounts of the Jordan Valley water, to the point where the Jordan River is no longer a river, it is actually a stream. You could literally walk across it if you're allowed, of course. We're not allowed to come anywhere near it. But if you can go there, and in some areas tourists can go, etc., you can walk across it, and it can barely, you don't have to worry about swimming or anything. It is mostly like a small stream, heavily polluted now with the waste from Israeli colonial settlements along the road, along the bed from Lake Tiberias to the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea, as a result, by the way, is shrinking. As you see there, it has kind of mostly disappeared as a lake, getting smaller and smaller. This is Lake Hula, which and the wetlands of the Hula area, which were drained completely, essentially. And this project was actually started by the Zionists under the British mandate, resulting in the disappearance of 119 species. 37 became completely locally extinct. And this is basically, in the north. In the south, Israel has built a canal with the help of the Jordanians, who were forced to do this by the Americans. Jordan was actually, arm twisted to build this canal on the Jordanian side. And the reason they built it on the Jordanian side, connecting the Red Sea to the Dead Sea, is that Jordan will end up holding the debt for the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund of about $20 billion. The canal is horrible for the environment, horrible for natural resources of the Wadi Araba, which is part of Palestine also, that was stolen in 1948. But anyways, regardless, Jordan ends up with the debt, Israel ends up with the political and other benefits, and the environment ends up paying the price, as are the people of Jordan and the Palestinians, few Palestinians that remain in the Negev. Other natural resources include the gas fields of the Palestinian coast. It turns out that the Eastern Mediterranean has some rich gas fields. Israel, of course, when it occupied 78% of Palestine, according to UN recommendations for partition in 1947, Israel was to hold about 50% of the coast of the Palestine, as the Jewish state was going to be formed and an Arab state formed with roughly 50-50 land divisions. But Israel in 1948, as I mentioned, took 78% of Palestine, including most of the coastal areas, 83% of coastal areas. The 17% of the coastal areas still hold gas fields, and that is why Gaza is besieged, by the way, because Israel not only took the gas fields that don't belong to it from 1948, they took the gas fields that don't belong to it from 1967 occupation, and they want those. And so they restricted the Gaza, for example, fishing zone to only 6 nautical miles. For main reason of the gas fields, in the Mediterranean. The colonizers also impact the environment in other ways. I showed this picture before, taken from a ridge actually. The Jabal Abu Ghneim, as you see in the top, in 1997, and where it came to look like in 1997. I mean, before 1997 on the top, and after 1997, it became basically this concrete jungle of buildings for Jewish-only colonial settlers. Israel also built colonial industrial zones inside the Palestinian areas. For example, near Salfit, Brooklyn village area is impacted by basically the presence of an industrial settlement called Barkan, which dumps its toxic waste on the local people. Some of my master's students study these effects on the health of the human population or on biodiversity, things like that. Gaza is one of the most worrisome of the areas of Palestine. Gaza has 2 million people now, and it's unlivable according to the United Nations, with basically some 6,000 people per square kilometer, with limited resources because the water was blocked upstream from Wadi Gaza, and the water aquifer is declining at a rapid rate, becoming salinized. So water is unusable, basically. These are projections from the UN in 2012. Unfortunately, even their worst case predictions came much worse than they even expected. There's the local damage, more localized damage, like uprooting trees. There are estimates of about 4 million fruiting trees like olives, almonds, figs, and carrots, etc., that were destroyed by the colonizers. And people try to cling to what's left of their land, basically. Now, we humans, of course, as a species, face many threats, which you know them. I don't want to talk too much about climate change or about human destruction of the oceans. The fact that 40% of the coral reefs have already disappeared. The mushrooming human population, which you see in the graph on the lower right-hand corner. All of this is really making us on the brink of the end, basically. There are some people saying that we have already crossed the no-return line. Some people are saying we still have 9 years to 2030 to get our act together and save our planet and our species from catastrophe. Whether you think it's already happened or about to happen or will happen in 2030, clearly the situation is really, really, really dangerous. And you know, that's globally, you know. So when you add to that the colonial things that I talked about in Palestine, well, one can become very despondent about the situation. And we Palestinians, I mean, sometimes I even wonder how people continue to live. And there are indeed people commit suicide, even friends of mine, etc., young people in Gaza who died because of suicide. They just realize it's pretty hopeless, or they think it's pretty hopeless. So one can really go to the edge of despair looking at society and where we are heading as a species, but also where we are heading as a population in historic Palestine, the very important part of the Fertile Crescent. It's also important, as you know, for religious purposes to more than half the globe when we are talking about, you know, Christians, Muslims, and Jews. there are 2.3 billion Christians, there's 1.5 billion Muslims, there are 12 million or 15 million Jews in the world. They all consider this area very important. Okay, so my point is, I don't want to depress you very much. So this is, as I say in the medical field, this taking history and descriptive, describing the symptoms and what's happening. As a medical geneticist, my background is medical genetics. I used to be a professor at Yale Medical School and Duke University Medical School, etc. I would say it's important to look at therapy and prognosis, albeit briefly, because we can't have a crystal ball or anything. If you ask me, if I'm forced to give an answer as to what's the chance for us as a species, and not just as Palestinians or as as Israelis or anything else, I would say it's 50-50, maybe 60-40, but it doesn't matter very much. The point is, we really have a serious issue, and its prognosis looks pretty hard, and we really have to start thinking and acting about this, thinking globally, acting locally, if you want, all of us, wherever we are, about these environmental issues, about climate change, about colonialism, and the last apartheid regime in the world being the State of Israel. These things are important for us to think about and act on. Just briefly, I want to tell you just some of the things that we are doing. We started an Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability, Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability, PIBS. PIBS is interested in, as its name implies, human and natural sustainability, communities, sustaining human and natural communities. And we do this through various mechanisms. For example, we have aquaponics, aquaculture, we do recycling, we try to reduce waste that people use. We try to teach our children, show our children that they can work to basically affect a change in their society through empowerment actions, etc. Through taking them in the field. Our motto, by the way, is respect. Respect for ourselves, respect for the environment, respect for other human beings, various levels of respect, that are interconnected, of course, because if we don't respect ourselves, how are we going to respect others, let alone respect animals and plants in our actions? Yes, we do engage in actions against oppression, like by using boycott, divestment, sanctions, which you are familiar with. BDSmovement.net website has a lot of resources on this. But we also think it's not sufficient to be working against oppression or against the greedy people that are destroying our planet, be it the Saudi royal family or the Israeli royal family of Netanyahu and ilk. We think it's important that we act positively to build the future that we are aiming for. This future is a future of hope. It's a future, it's a future that we have no choice. It's our only future if we are to have a future. The other future is really so horrible hard to even contemplate what my son or hopefully grandchildren one day will live through if we go through the next 10 years, 9 years doing the same thing we were doing before. And when Omar summarized the issue of COVID-19 here in Palestine and the apartheid system of delivering vaccines to Israel, but not to the Palestinians living under Israeli control. We have to remember that all these pandemics are also connected to this economic structure of the world, that's consumerist structure that allowed zoonotics, as we call them in the sciences, you know, viruses and other diseases that come from animals jump onto humans. In this case, the virus came from a bat. This is related directly to climate change. It's related directly to the greed that fuels the world economy today and makes people like some people multi-billionaires even unimaginable that one person holds a wealth equivalent to all of the wealth of the countries of Africa, except South Africa, you know, which has a bit of wealth. You know, this is the sick society that we have arrived at, and we need to change. How do we change it? Each one of us should, and I'm sure many of you are already doing a lot of these things, act. Thinking globally, as I said, acting locally, it's very, very critical. So we encourage you to act in your own sphere of things. If you want ideas, we're happy to supply ideas for action. And I will stop here because I'm sure there are areas you might be interested in. We'll open them for question and answer, and we can discuss. And some of you may have already put some questions in the chat.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing, Dr. Mazen. We'll move to the questions from the chat now, and people feel free to continue adding questions, and as they go in there, we will ask some of them. So the first question, someone picked up on the fact that you mentioned you had met with a Swiss delegation recently, and they're wondering, how did they get in? Are the borders open for visitors?
No, these are the Swiss delegation that has offices in Ramallah as representative to the Palestinian Authority. They also have offices in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. These are the diplomatic corps, basically. So diplomats still come and go as they wish.
Okay, thank you. Someone else picked up on your mention of Lake Hula, and they're wondering, is that the Hula Valley that the Israelis call a swamp?
Yeah, that's the thing, is you know, this is the propaganda of the colonialists everywhere in the US and South Africa, etc. They use the same terminology. We have come, we have brought civilization, we drained the swamps, we modernized the country. Well, sorry, but the country didn't need your modernization. Palestine, as I said, was part of the Fertile Crescent. It was actually exporting most of the oranges of Europe used to come from Palestine. You know, Palestine was #1 actually in terms of European citrus imports before 1948. And the second was, I think, the United States and some South American countries. Europe is growing citrus in places like Spain and Portugal and other places. But before 1948, that's where they got most of their citrus fruits, you know, lemons and oranges and grapefruits and things like that. So Palestine was never an arid region, was never, and when you say swamps, even there's international conventions that say you shouldn't call these places swamps, they are wetlands. Wetlands actually are protected by the Ramsar conventions, international conventions that even Israel signed them eventually. But the wetlands are very, very important habitats for like migrating birds and others, and also for humans. I mean, the world made an outcry, by the way, when Saddam Hussein drained the marshes in the south of Iraq, which are also wetlands that people depended on. Palestinians depended on the wetlands of the Hula. The Palestinians were removed, the wetlands were removed, And this destroyed habitats for both people and animals and plants. So yeah, we have to be careful, but this language that they use is so common. You know, we made the desert green, we planted trees. Yes, but they don't tell you what trees they planted. They said we planted millions of trees. Well, they destroyed 530 Palestinian villages and towns with all their agricultural fields, with all their trees, including olive trees, fig trees, almond trees, you know, productive trees, but also wild trees like oak trees. They basically used bulldozers to wipe them all out around them. Millions of trees, basically, they uprooted. And yes, they did plant some trees. What did they plant? Pinus halepensis, a pine tree. Uniform culture, if you want. This is also emblematic of colonialism, is the attempt to re-engineer the land, if you want, re-engineer the people, re-engineer the land. Imagine something, in this case, I want to make a European country. Now, when you go to Tel Aviv, for example, which is a city built north of Jaffa, and now have grown to swallow Jaffa, so they call it Tel Aviv Jaffa. But anyway, when they built Tel Aviv, now you go to Tel Aviv, and it's like you're in a European city, not like you are in an Arab or Middle Eastern city, which is where the location is. It's to reshape, re-engineer, reimagine a country according to what the colonizers think it ought to be, not according to what it is already, and it is adapted. And it's ridiculous. I mean, it's based on false notions and on lies and distortions. Sorry, I'm rambling. Go ahead.
A question about the Natural History Museum. Someone is wondering what countries or organizations financially support the work of the Natural Museum, and how can people contribute if they're interested?
Yeah, so the museum and the institute, PIBS, Palestine Institute of Biodiversity and Sustainability, was started very different than many NGOs and other groups here. It was actually started not as an NGO, and it still is not an NGO, non-governmental organization. It is part of Bethlehem University. We decided to start it with local effort, local donations, and local volunteer effort. So our first volunteer meeting was all local people. And we have decided that's how we want to operate for the first couple of years. And to ensure that it's sustainable with local support and so forth, initially, at least to get the agenda to be localized, to be indigenous agenda, not a foreign, let's say, donor-driven agenda. I and my wife donated $250,000 to get it started. Bethlehem University donated the land and the buildings, and they help us with maintenance and other things. And the volunteers did most of the work for the first 2 years. Then we started slowly getting grant money, but based on our own agenda, basically what we want to get. And actually funders started asking us what we want to do. So this is basically how we operated for most of our budget. The biggest challenge for us is to get unrestricted funds for operations. And for that, we depend on individual donations. We have solar power now for electricity, so we don't have much electricity bills. We have some staff. We have to pay the salary of some staff from the museum operating budget. So those come from individual donations. We do get some good individual donations. We just launched a crowdfunding campaign for a children's room for education for children. We need to collect about $5,000. I can put the crowdfunding link if you want in the chat room also in a bit. But this is what we are doing. Slowly, meticulously, we manage with support of people from around the world.
Thank you. Someone has asked about waste collection and sorting in communities. For example, in Bethlehem, are you able to describe a little bit about that?
So we have moved as Palestinians significantly in good directions in terms of waste management. For example, one of the issues of waste management has been that there's very, very little recycling, and it has increased over the past 10 years. There needs to be much more on this. Organic waste, for example, we have spent a lot of time educating people that organic waste, solid waste like kitchen waste, kitchen food material, peels and stuff like that, eggshells, coffee grains, etc., should not go into the bin for regular waste. It should be put in the garden as compost. You can compost, it'll enrich your garden, it'll enrich your sources. And we have had good success in training people about these things. There has been also success at the policy levels. Palestinians have established centralized waste processing facilities. For example, in Bethlehem, we have the Joint Services Council, which covers the 3 major towns of Bethlehem, which are Bethlehem, Beit Sahur, and Beit Jala, plus the refugee camps and the villages around Bethlehem. And those all take their solid waste to the central facility for processing. Liquid waste, on the other hand, is an issue, partly because Israel also is tries to use every leverage they can as the colonizing power on the Palestinians, both on solid waste and liquid waste. For example, when the Palestinians built a very nice facility for solid waste disposal, the Israelis said you cannot operate it. You cannot operate it unless you are willing to take the colonial settler garbage, basically. A bizarre request, that they put their illegal colonial settlements on our land, and they want us to take its garbage, basically. Same for the liquid treatment facilities. Here in Bethlehem area, there was talk about creating a liquid treatment facility, but the Israelis said we would agree to it only if you take the settlement liquid waste, which is now being dumped mostly on Palestinian land, nearby Palestinian communities. Bottom line is to deal with liquid and solid waste is hard when you don't have sovereignty, when you have basically an occupation that's intent on making your life miserable. When they even bombed sewage treatment facilities in Gaza, and they bombed electric power plants in Gaza. Till this day, there's electricity coming 1 or 2 hours a day in most places in Gaza. So you can imagine you cannot operate liquid sewage treatment facilities without electricity. It doesn't work that way. You have to have the motors running. So, and Israel says you can't do that. So what do the people of Gaza do? Unfortunately, they dump their sewage into the Mediterranean Sea. And as I tell Israelis when I get the chance to speak to them, that sewage that's dumped into the Mediterranean Sea, thanks to your government policies, actually goes upstream because of the water stream in the Mediterranean, goes up the coast to Jaffa and Tel Aviv. And you are swimming in the shit of Gaza because of your government policies. So, it's many, many challenges, I would say, and environmental issues can be solved if we have peace with justice here, if we have sovereignty, if we have control.
One final question for you, Dr. Mazen. Someone noted that Palestinian properties were often built with cisterns to collect rainfall. If aquifers are currently being diverted to Israel, Are there any plans for localized Palestinian-led water harvesting to protect?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. The Palestinians historically has depended on cistern collecting rainwater in our region. And this collection of rainwater that happened for thousands of years from the time of the Canaanites till now, till basically Israel occupied, as I said, 78% of Palestine in 1948, and then the other 22% in 1967. In both places, right after they occupied both parts, they told the local people they can't dig any more cisterns. And so there was actually illegal for us to collect rainwater through cisterns systems after I mean, my house, for example, was built before Israel. So we had a water well. We collected rainwater before 1967 occupation. After that, it became more difficult because Israel actually chased people and demolished cisterns to collect rainwater. After the Oslo Accords 1993-94, the West Bank and Gaza were divided into areas A, B, C, and Israel allowed the Palestinians to determine what happens in a small part of the country, tiny part of the country that they call Area A. So Area A, they were allowed to collect rainwater, but Area A is roughly like 13% of the West Bank, which in turn is 20% of historic Palestine. So you're talking about 13% of 20%. So you're talking about 3% of historic Palestine or so that we are allowed to dig cisterns for collecting rainwater. This is what exists today.
Thank you so much for your presentation and for your question answering, Dr. Mazen. And thank you all for your questions. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to answer all of them today. Now I'd like to briefly point you to the Kumi entry and action for the week. If you keep your eyes on the chat, you'll find the relevant links found there. Consumer due diligence. Look out for Dead Sea products in your local shops and request more information from your shop regarding the product's origin to ensure that products are not originating from or linked to Israeli settlements. 2, raise awareness about Ahava products and their illegality in your local community. For example, you can share a document called Virtual Field Visit, Natural Resource Exploitation in the Dead Sea Area, the case of Ahava. This is a document from El Haq, and there's a YouTube video on the website. You can also email the company Fosun International Limited. They're currently the owners of Ahava, and request that they halt operations in the occupied Palestinian territory. Their email address is investment@fosun.com, and I think you can find that in the chat as well. To further the impact of your advocacy, you can share the videos and any emails that you send on social media. Include a link to the page of the Kumi Now website along with your hashtags, #DeadSea, #KumiNow, and #Kumi12, which is today's action. At this point, I'd like to give our guest an opportunity to chime in as well. Dr. Mazen, do you have any comments on this Kumi action or other ways that people watching can help raise awareness of Israel's exploitation of Palestinian resources?
I think getting informed is a good start, and writing to people about it and showing the connectivity between the struggles for example, for food sovereignty and for environmental justice, the connectivity across the globe on these issues. I mean, when the people in the US are struggling against the pipelines or against the destruction of their landscape, Native Americans, etc., it's connected to our struggle. Black Lives Matter, all of these things are connected. Israeli troops, for example, train American police officers to become racist, if you want. That's what they do, and it has happened. There's a lot of connectivity between struggles. So again, think locally, think globally, act locally, still is valid. I just put in the chat room also the link for our crowdfunding campaign, which we just started today, actually, in the chat if anybody wants to donate for the children unit.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us today. A link to the video of this gathering, along with all of the links that were shared today, will be available on the Kumi Now website and on YouTube in a day or two, and it will be shared in the next newsletter. You can subscribe to Kumi Now on YouTube and subscribe to the newsletter to make sure you receive all of them. We would greatly appreciate if you share this information with friends and colleagues. Please also share information on future sessions. Next week, the session will look at conditions in Gaza. If you would like to be reminded of the online gatherings an hour before they start, you can register for email reminders at kuminow.com/online and use the form at the bottom of the page. Thank you again, and we hope to see you back here next week. Good afternoon and good night.